Hey everybody, and welcome to a skill breakdown. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these. I've gotten a little busy or distracted making other kinds of videos, but there are still a few characters that I have not covered with this series. Not many left, but a couple. And figure I might as well wrap it all up, so that way, in case any player is curious what any character in the given game may have at some point, this can maybe be helpful for them. Sir Percivale is a Christian alignment defender. You unlock him in Act 2. After you recruit Guinevere, you'll need to actually have her on your roster, and she will spawn a side mission to then go and recruit Percival. And you won't be able to bring Mordred for that mission either. Now, he's really strong, actually. One of the strongest defenders in the game. He has a little bit of competition, though, with Galahad. And in my opinion, Galahad's sort of a better version of him in a lot of ways, but Percival, I think, does have his sort of niche fit where you may want to bring him instead of Galahad. So let's get into his skills. Starting in Tier 1, as always, we have his basic attack, Flaming Strike. It's the standard defender attack, except the difference is this one also causes the burning status, 30% damage at the start of their turn. So it's just a naturally more powerful version at base than other defenders' basic attack. And with that, it also has some unique, or at least mixed around orders to the upgrades it has on it. The first one being Searing Blaze, 15% weapon damage for Flaming Strike. Eternal Flame, increase the burn duration by 1. Charred Flesh, reduce the cost of the strike by 1, so that brings the strike cost down to 2. But now you do 50% less damage. And with Undead Bane, increase the damage by 50% against the Lost. So these two together would technically keep your damage against the Lost at normal level, but now it'd be 2 AP per swing. And the upgrades on this are all fairly good. The ones on the left side, pretty standard, useful for everything. The ones on the right side is going to be a bit more personal taste, I think. Losing 50% damage is a lot, even though defenders don't really do a whole lot of damage to begin with their normal strikes. I feel like gimping that even further may not be the way to go, even if you'll maybe get more attacks in, unless I guess you really are just trying to spread the burn dot around as much as possible. And at least in the current season, you don't fight a whole lot of Lost as you get further into the game, so Undead Bane is something you may switch into or out of depending on what you're doing. When the Lost season comes around, this will be a great skill pick. We have Shield Charge, standard defender ability. It's amazing, say it every single time. Good mobility, offensive utility or defensive utility. Whether they can't be knocked down, you can at least knock them back most of the time and create space for allies. And offensively, you knock them down, and all of a sudden they're taking a bunch of extra damage from everyone else on your party. Shield Spikes grants it a 25% weapon damage upgrade. Wade Charge reduces the cooldown by 1. Extended Charge increases the range by 2. And Momentum resets the cooldown if you get a kill with it. I don't generally use this for the damage or really get much in the way of kills for it. And I think if you're trying to up your damage, there's better uses for your skill points. But the Extended Charge and the Wade Charge I find to be pretty much must-haves if you're using this ability. He has the Guard skill in Tier 1. This is a pretty standard defensive ability for most of the defenders in the game. You basically drain whatever AP you have left, and it provides an aura of increased armor for allies within range of him. At default, they need to be adjacent. And also, he gets Overwatch for all the tiles around him, which can also be useful for diverting enemies around a space and wasting AP. All the upgrades on this are pretty good. Defend Ally is just an extra +3 armor. It's a defensive ability, so every bit can help. With Resting Guard, he basically just gets 1 AP on his next turn, so it's kind of like a reimbursement. You used all your AP to hunker down here, so on the next turn you get to do a little bit extra. It's definitely not bad. Vindicator, increase the range by 1, so they don't no longer need to be adjacent. And Nightly Zeal, reduce the cooldown by 1. All of these are really good. I think the least useful one, or the least important, is Resting Guard. These other three very much play into what this ability is supposed to be doing, and definitely help elevate it a significant amount. Unique amongst the defenders for Percival, though, is Vengeance. and he gets it in tier 1. Basically, whenever an enemy hits him, he will gain 10% damage against them until the end of the encounter. So it's a decent offensive boost. You'll see Percivale is slightly offensively oriented. He has a good mix of defense and offense, and while he's not the outright most offensive defender, he definitely has a good amount. All the upgrades on this aren't really great, especially because he's a defender, and we'll kind of show why. The first one is Berserk, plus 2 AP if he has no HP. Well, your defender's supposed to be taking hits. So if he's reached 0 HP, then he's probably going to keep taking damage, and you really want to avoid vitality damage. So this isn't really great. I mean, with things like Guard, I guess, you can at least get some armor back, but only at the end of your turn if you drain all your AP for it. This doesn't really work well with the defender playstyle. And also, especially in the later game, your defenders will almost never run out of HP. Avenger, if you get hit at least twice, you just get an extra AP. This one is actually a very good one. He will get hit twice, especially as a defender, so it's an easy free AP. And then Frenzy and Combat Fever, again, these are both skills that operate off of having less HP. With Frenzy, the less HP he has, the more damage he does, up to 30%. And Combat Fever, if he has no HP, against 5 unbreakable armor. You won't ever take advantage of these. As you get further into the game, defenders become so durable. These will provide... This will never happen, more or less. These two, Berserk and Combat Fever, will basically never happen unless you're trying to make it happen, and I don't think that's a good idea. And Frenzy, his HP drains so slowly, unless you never heal him from the beginning of, a mission to the end of it, you're not going to get much damage off of this. For the next 3 passives, he has Strength for 10% more weapon damage, fairly standard, but he does have Pyromania, a very strong passive, and in tier 1, 50% burn damage. So if you really want to, lean into his fire aspect, this is something you'll probably want to pick up. And Robust, a standard plus 10% of vitality and HP. Getting into tier 2, we have a few more standard abilities, such as Taunt, but it's a very powerful, almost, backbone of a defensive defender's toolkit. All enemies within 4 tower ranges of Percivale, in this case, will now have to spend their next turn attacking him. It doesn't list this, but if enemies have 50% physical debuff resistance or higher, they will be immune to taunt, so keep that in mind. With Armor Bait, he gains 7 armor for the 1 turn, which is very useful since he's going to be having hits directed at him. He becomes more resistant to them. With Memorian Curse, the cost is reduced by 1 for taunt, bringing it down to that 2 AP cost, 2 turn cooldown. Very efficient. With Demoralize, enemies that are taunted have 1 less AP, so now maybe they'll only be able to get 1 hit against Percivale, so it's just a more efficient turn waster. And then Warcry, increase the range by 1. All of these are good. If you plan to use Taunt, you're going to want to pick up all of these upgrades. Moving on to Flurry, this is a decent damage dealing ability for a defender. Target up to 2 enemies, and you do 100% weapon damage for 4 AP. It's a more efficient multi-attack, essentially. Only has 1 turn cooldown, so you can use this every turn if you want to. The first upgrade on it is Armor Breaker. Flurry gains 30% armor break, which is pretty good, actually, as not many heroes in the game have great armor breaking aside from champions, so when you can upgrade the armor break on a specific ability, it actually becomes a good alternative. Zestful Flurry, gain 1 AP when you kill a unit using Flurry, so you could hypothetically get back 2 of your AP or 3 if you take the Extended Flurry upgrade, so it's a bit of a refund. Again, as a defender, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of mileage out of that. Dismemberment, plus 50% weapon damage to Flurry. And Extended Flurry, as I mentioned before, you can now target 3 targets. If you're going to use this ability, all of the upgrades on it are pretty good. I'm pretty hesitant on Zestful Flurry. If you do want to take it, you will definitely want to take all of the other upgrades before it. Now we have the Defender version of Armorer. Minus 1 AP from the heavy armor penalty, so as I've explained before, heavy armor has a AP penalty, minus 2 or minus 1. In this case now it's minus 1 or 0. It has 2 upgrades on it, just twice each. Thick Skinned, 4 armor each for a total of 8, and Fitted Armor 5% twice for 10%. The Thick Skinned are definitely more impactful, because if you want the 10%, you could just grab that from Robust and get Vitality at the same time. but definitely it's worth circling back to and picking up later if you just really want to make him as tanky as possible. What really stands out for him, though, in Tier 2 is his support ability, Encouragement. Encouragement is an amazing ability because it's an AP generator. It costs 1 AP, 2-turn cooldown with the upgrades. Super, super efficient. You can easily get this off multiple times in an encounter, assuming that the allies are within range. 2-tile range is not the worst, but it's still fairly small because, depending on your party comp, it's very easy to get separated. The first upgrade is the Lord's Will. Reduce the cost of encouragement by 1. That's what brings it down to that 1 AP cost. Rosary Prayer, -1 to the cooldown, brings it down to that 2-turn cooldown. Both of these are very, very important if you're going to be using encouragement. The Lord's Wrath. Now encouragement grants a 20% weapon damage upgrade to adjacent allies. That's huge. Damage and AP is very, very solid. And Swift Justice, +2 movement AP for adjacent allies. So now they can use some free AP to position and then save some of the AP they've generated from encouragement or just their own natural AP to actually spend it all on attacking. This is a very good ability. It's only 1 AP, but for how cheap it is and such a low cooldown, you can probably get this going, a couple times per fight. The last two passives is Strong-Willed, 30% mental debuff resist, and Robust, 10% vitality, 10% HP. Moving on to Tier 3, we have Recuperate, and I've talked about this a lot in the past. It's a decent ability, just I find sort of redundant for defenders by this stage of the game, but I do know some players use it and really enjoy it and think it's, contributing. So take that for what you will. Just me personally, I've never ever used this ability, and I personally haven't struggled. But if you do use it, pretty strong effects. As you can see here, 2 AP cost, 4-turn cooldown. It's a pretty cheap ability. Cooldown is, decent. Gain 50 temporary HP, so you're effectively going to be nearly immortal for the duration of this ability, and you're definitely going to be eating whatever hits come your way just fine, especially with the block and the armor that a defender has. The upgrades on it are pretty good too. The hero gains +8 armor, so even tankier. With bolster, +25 temporary HP, so now it's 75, which is just a huge amount. Steel Resolve gained 30% mental debuff resist, so now you probably won't be getting, debuffed or stunned, things like that, or at least as bad. And Benediction, it now lasts 2 turns. So 2 turns for 75 HP and an extra 8 armor. I mean, I would take these 3 upgrades for sure, and if you're struggling with, being stunned and stuff, then I would pick up Steel Resolve as well. It's very strong, and if you're playing through the game and you find that, maybe your Percivale is getting his butt kicked a bit too much, this is definitely something I would consider. Next is the passive All Resistance, 15% mental debuff resist and physical debuff resist, so just all around good for resisting negative status effects. With physical resistance and mental fort, it's an extra 15% each, so 30% of each is very solid. With dot resistance, -1 turn duration for bleeding, burning, and poison, this is not a huge deal. Your defenders are so bulky anyways, I find that the full duration doesn't really impact them a whole lot. An extra vitality, +17 vitality, 1 injury token. This is one I think you can honestly just never really take because, again, by this stage of the game, you're never really going to be taking much in the way of vitality damage, and you definitely won't be needing the injury token. Up next is Shield Block, a very solid passive, just flat out 5% block, and honestly, the base skill is better than any of the upgrades on it for the most part, as block is just an extremely powerful defensive mechanic. The upgrades on it, though, are not bad. With Shield Bait, +5% block if you're taunting or guarding, which you're going to be doing very often, so this is almost just another permanent 5% block chance. So this is almost a permanent +5% block. Not quite, because sometimes you will have downturns, but if you're alternating between the two abilities, it's like a 99% uptime. Flank Defense, this is a good one, because now if enemies attack from the left or right, you will now at least get a 50% block efficiency, so in this case you can see my Percivale has 50% block, so it would be 25%. So it is damage reduction, but there is defender gear that's actually not very uncommon to turn to face attacking enemies, which makes this upgrade completely redundant. So if you have that gear, avoid this upgrade. If you don't have that gear, you're going to want to take this. With Stalwart Defender, plus 5% block if you're at full HP, decreases to 0% at 0 HP. This is definitely one worth taking because you'll have pretty high HP for most of the time, so if it's not 5%, it'll at least be 4% like for pretty much the entire mission. So between these two, my Percival has an effective 60% block if I had these on him most of the mission. And then with First Strike, damage suffered from the first attack of each enemy in an encounter is reduced by 100% if you block it. This is just a pretty good way to just avoid taking damage altogether from a fair amount of attacks. His last unique skill in Tier 3 is actually a pretty cool offensive ability, and it's Immolation. 6 AP cost is very high, with a very low cooldown of 2. And it deals 150% weapon damage to an adjacent enemy, and then 50% to every enemy adjacent with whoever you targeted. So you can hit up to a lot of enemies with this, really. I think like 6 would be the highest cap with, if I'm doing the math right. And that's a lot. With the first upgrade, Cleansing Flame, an additional 15% weapon damage to the initial hit, which then would, 50% of that initial hit is then transferred, so it does affect, the entire AoE. Embers is -1 to the cooldown, which brings it down to 2. I mean, even at 3, that's a really low cooldown for such a huge AoE. Trial by Fire, it now causes burning, a 50% burn, higher than normal. Definitely something you're going to want to take if you're using this ability. And Fiery Judgment, plus 25% weapon damage to the additional targets, adjacent to the initial target. So 75%. This becomes a pretty strong AoE. For a defender, this is probably one of the strongest offensive abilities in the entire game. And it's unique to Percival, so if you're using him, I honestly think you should take advantage of it. I think he works best, like most defenders, built defensively, but honestly, I think you'd be kind of foolish to not take advantage of this pretty crazy offensive ability that he has. The last 3 passives is Strength for another 10% weapon damage, Robust for 10% Vitality and HP, and Hardened Armor to reduce that armor loss by 20%. Just helps increase that tankiness. And that is all Percival has to offer. It's a lot of stuff pretty similar to your standard Defender toolkit, but he has a lot of offensive stuff kind of snuck in here, so he can definitely be one of the more damage-dealing oriented defenders, but also has a defensive playstyle you could fully lean into, supported by things like Encouragement. He's a fairly versatile defender, and I think there's a lot to enjoy here if this is the defender you want to play with on your Christian runs. That's all I have, so if you made it to the end of the video, then thank you. I appreciate your viewership, and I hope to see you in the next one.